of House Bill 692.
For the request, is there an objection? And now the lady has the floor to open the debate.
Thank you, Speaker. Again, this is the best election integrity bill that's going to be coming forward because it's addressing a lot of issues that have been brought up over the past couple of years. And I'm just going to do an overview on it, and then, well, you can go ahead and start discussing this bill. One thing I want to know that 692 is replacing House Bill 549. That was the one that was brought forward.
Lady, you got to reference other bills with unanimous consent.
Okay. Well, somebody else did it earlier and that wasn't done, so that's okay. That's all right. I want.
Is there objection? The lady can refer to other.
It was done earlier. Okay, thank you.
592 or other election bills.
Okay, this is House Bill 692 is replacing House Bill 549 because there were some changes that were made in that bill that were identified after it was first presented. So this one takes care of those issues. One was doing away with the same day voter election day registration. That is back in this bill. And I want to just discuss the items that I think are very important as far as making sure that our elections are secure. One of the first things mentioned is the retention of records. As far as the timing on some of our records, they are 5, 2, and 1 year, and this simply just takes it from 5 into 2 years. And clerks were fine with that because a lot of the materials that were saved for 1 year were very small in volume, and so that was not a problem. The second thing that we talk about is the forms of identification that will be permitted for voting. The other things that go along with that would also include residency and citizenship. The one piece of identification that was removed was college identification because students are able to use a current Idaho driver's license, and if they are unable to drive, which I'm aware, being a special ed director, there's some kids that just may never get a driver's license, but they can obtain an Idaho identification card. You can use a current U.S. passport, military identification, and tribal identification. And also you can use a concealed weapons carry for identification as well. As far as acceptable residency requirements, this removes in a utility bill. There have been a lot of stories about folks just using their cell phone and holding that up and saying, I've got a Verizon bill to show that they pay a utility bill. The sad thing about a Verizon bill is it is not tied to any address. And with residency, you want to identify an address. So a multitude of things can be used: utility bills, current residential lease agreements, rental agreements, W-2, 1099, all sorts of records that are listed. And then the acceptable proof of U.S. citizenship, and that can be also about 6 different things that can be used. The next big part of this bill is that it removes the affidavits. So affidavits, if you are aware that if you show up to a polling place without any identification at all, that you can receive an affidavit once you swear that you are who you are, and you sign it, and then they give you a ballot. You vote with your ballot, you put it into the box with all of the other ballots, and then if they prove the next day that you are not who you say you are, that illegal ballot is now in there with a bunch of legal ballots, so somebody's just now been canceled out. So affidavits are being removed in this bill. And let's see, I'm trying, there's so much good stuff in here. The other thing that we've provided for is to provide a state ID for those people who are incapable of paying for any ID. So there's been a creation of an election integrity fund, and this will allow money to go into that fund, and money is going to be taken out and would have $5 that would be given to the controller's office, and then another $10 to ITD to make sure that they get a state government issued ID. This would not be a driver's license, this would just be a state government issued ID. Okay, I'm getting to the end. And so the big bulk of it in the middle is everything that has to do with driver's licenses. That's why that is in there for those of you who actually took the time to read all of this. And then The state government issued ID that would be given to the folks who can't afford them would be a 4-year ID card free of charge. And then again, that describes the particulars with those. Finally, $200,000 would be transferred from the general fund to the election integrity fund. And this is not only for the payment of these state government issued IDs, but it would also pay for $60,000 in the program to interface with the Secretary of State's office. So that's going to take a little bit of work as well. So this that's the fiscal note. And the most important part is that this does not go into effect immediately. I think that it's obvious that a lot of the clerks would like a little more time to educate folks on what the new requirements are. And so this would go into effect on July 1st of 2022. The second, last thing I want to mention, there is a trailer bill that is following this one. And because of the timeliness of trying to get it before everyone, that will be coming later. So right now we're just voting on this bill, and there'll be some minor changes that come up with the trailer bill. So at this time, I stand for question, Speaker.
Is there further debate? Item 18.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To debate the bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You've all received the Attorney General opinion on this bill that flags a number of problems, constitutional and otherwise, that I think are pretty serious. I think in all likelihood, one of two things will happen in this bill, with this bill. I think it will certainly be challenged, no question about that. I think there's a very good chance it's just struck down as a violation of the Equal Protection Clause for unduly burdening voting. But regardless, what I'm quite sure will happen is that it would trigger the National Voter Registration Act and force Idaho to comply with automatic voter registration, or motor voter. Now, personally, I've been bringing an automatic voter registration bill for years, so I think that would be fantastic if we had to comply with that. But you all may not agree with me on that, but I think that is what will ultimately transpire here. And the reason that I think that this will happen, there are a number of, and if you read the opinion, I won't belabor the opinion because you all have it to read. But the citizenship requirement, a similar citizenship requirement, was struck down by the 10th Circuit, and that one was actually more generous than this bill is. That one allowed for 13 different ways to prove your citizenship. This one only provides for 6. That one was struck down as unconstitutional, so it seems unlikely that ours would prevail. There are a number of other problems in it. Now, I know that there's the registration by mail component, for example, requires that you have to have a residence address, which would preclude people that have P.O. boxes, which is much of rural Idaho, from being able to register by mail. Now, that I know the goal is to fix that with the trailer, but there are a lot of other problems here that are not being fixed by the trailer. One of them, actually, I'd really like to flag for you. If you want to flip to the bill, page 3, now this relates to the methods for proving your address. So you have to prove three separate things. You have to, under this bill, you have to prove your ID, your citizenship, and your address. And these are the ways that you have to prove your address. And only these. There are only 5 permissible types of ways to prove your address. And I want you, as I go through this, to view this through the eyes of little Susie Suffragette, a hypothetical high school kid who's just turning 18 and is eager to go out there and register to vote. And this is what she would have to do to be able to register in person. Number 1, a utility bill, not including a cell phone bill that is no more than 6 months old. Do you know an 18-year-old that has a utility bill in their own name? I most certainly do not. Number 2, a current residential lease agreement, rental agreement, mortgage statement, or deed of trust. Do you know an 18-year-old that has a residential lease agreement, rental agreement, mortgage statement, or deed of trust in their name? I do not. I doubt there are very many in the state of Idaho. Number 3, and this is where some might qualify, a W-2 or 1099 federal tax form for the most recent available year. So if they have a job, then they might be able to vote, might be able to register under this, although they would have had to have a job when they were 17 because it's for the most recent tax year. But there's an awful lot of kids out there who don't have jobs, and I would hate to see them shut out from being able to register to vote. Number 4, a military leave and earnings statement showing the Idaho residency of the individual. Again, I'm doubting very much that our little Susie Suffragette can pony up a military leave and earnings statement in order to be able to register in person. And number 5, a government record showing the individual as having paid property taxes at the address within the last year. Really, really, really unlikely that this 18-year-old is going to be able to prove they've paid property taxes last year in their own name. And that's it, folks. Those are the only forms that they can use to show their address. They can't use any of the things that they could use now. You know, there's lots of other things you can use now, bank statements and insurance cards and all kinds of things, but none of those are on this list. These are the only 5. Now, moving beyond the 18-year-olds, I think this presents a huge problem for people of all ages. My 80-year-old mother, who I sadly lost last December, but she couldn't have produced any of these. I paid for her rent and I paid her utilities. They were all in my name. She was born in the USA, 80 years old, has lived in Idaho for 21 years, and she could not have produced a single one of the documents on this list to prove her residency address. I think there are people in the middle. There's lots of people, non-working people who might have their home or their mortgage statement or the utilities in their spouse's name, who would not be able to produce a utility bill in their own name in order to be able to register to vote here. So for all practical purposes, this would shut probably tens of thousands of legal Idahoans out from being able to use this process for registering to vote. It is quite jarring. And just as a policy matter, I mean, putting aside what I view as the inevitable likelihood this will be struck in court or at least subject us to federal law, we only have 42% of eligible 18 to 19-year-olds in this state who vote right now. I think that's a tragedy. I think we should be, that's terrible. These are the kids who have the most at stake in our elections. They should be voting in huge numbers. And I would like to see us doing what we can to get more of them engaged in our democracy. And I don't know, I just think we want to increase that rather than trying to drive it down from 42% to 2%, which is where we're heading with this bill. And, you know, to what end are we doing this? There is not even a whiff of voter fraud in Idaho. There is no sign of anybody registering or voting who shouldn't be. This creates many problems, but I have yet to find a problem that it solves. And I just have to ask you, you know, how many thousands of legal voters is it worth disenfranchising to address the speculation that someday, somewhere, someone may somehow illegally vote? The costs are not worth it. And I would say further that, you know, we hear election integrity thrown around a lot, and I know that's the purported rationale for why we're doing all this stuff, but I think this bill does the very opposite. There is no integrity to an election where thousands of legal voters are unjustly excluded. So in the name of election integrity, I hope you will give this your red light.
There further debate? Lady from 24.
I wasn't, Mr. Speaker, thank you. I wasn't totally prepared to debate today, but I see the bill is up and I want to debate. My emails are running, 3 to 1 to put this down. Most of the people in my district don't feel like our elections are corrupt. We're looking at the national scene. They might say yes, they think there've been some issues nationwide, but they don't feel there's any issues in Idaho. There may be, and I just don't know about them, but there's a lot of things in this bill that are just kind of restricting, and the SOP for one, and I know you mentioned it and I didn't hear, but there's probably about $200,000 that will be for all of these IDs that we're now going to make for everyone and give out. Records retention is a big deal. It extends something from 1 year to 2 years. The odd thing is that they removed the personal identification affidavits, even though they are left the personal ID affidavit in statute. So that wasn't taken out. Election day registration changes are excessively restrictive. It will make it very difficult for new residents to be able to register to vote if they have already gone to the DMV and gotten a driver's license, which isn't required for 90 days, but voting requires it within 30 days, a residency. Our current IDs don't seem to line up with citizenship competent. I looked at my ID, it doesn't say US citizen, even though it's a star card, and took me a ton of papers to get. It doesn't say I'm a US resident. And so I find that really hard, and I don't want to have to go out and try to get something else before May 17th so I could vote, or I guess it goes into effect in July, in November. That's very, very difficult. And the funny thing is you can use an out-of-state ID to prove citizenship, but you can't use it as an identifier of yourself. That just seems really strange. Overall, the citizenship piece will be well-intended. While well-intended is going to make it the hardest for naturally born citizens, it'll be easier for the naturalized citizens than it will be for me to get this. It eliminates the college IDs for students, and I don't think that's good either. Maybe we need to change the college IDs and at least say where they live, where they come from. A lot of these kids actually are claiming residency where they are going to college, and that's just what they do. Additional documents that are reasonable to prove residency beyond just the ones listed. It just seems like way overkill for me. Full name requirements. How many of you have your full name on your star card or your ID that took you? I'm telling you, I took a manila folder in to get my star card. It's much easier for a male, but it was a little more difficult for a female. You had to prove all, your name changes and stuff. I can go on and on. We don't have this issue. There's kind of a conspiracy thinking anything that happens in Washington, D.C. is happening in Idaho, and it's just not. And I think we need to wake up and stop putting all these ideas out there.
Is there further debate? Gentleman from 10.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My 19-year-old stepson lives with us, and he wouldn't be able to prove his residency. He's as American as apple pie, but he wouldn't be able to prove his residency based on these criteria. He does pay his own cell phone bill, but he reimburses his dad for that. He pays his own car insurance, but that's not a utility. And so there'd be no way for him to prove where he's from. Now, I did really appreciate the part of this bill that provided for the free IDs, because the main challenge to voter ID requirements is the expense to those who don't have an ID to get one. And so I do think that that's pretty smart on the part of the good lady to merge those two things together. But, where my stepson wouldn't be able to register to vote if he weren't already, where my father, before he passed, for the last several months of his life, he wouldn't have been able to produce any of this either. If you want to register to vote on the day of a March election and you haven't filed your taxes yet, or you've just filed your taxes, actually that'd be a better example, the day before, so the most recent year available is the day before. For the year before, you can't get something that's at least 30 days in advance, like the bill proposes on line 5 of page 3. My final comment is I deal with a lot of family law cases in my practice, and I see a lot of folks come in where absolutely everything's been put in one party's name. Now, of course, that doesn't change community property laws or anything like that, but I'll speak to usually a wife who's very concerned because the house, the car, the insurance, the utilities are all in just the husband's name. And that would mean that a lot of wives, mostly wives, would not be able to prove their residency to register to vote. And so I like this concept, but I'll have to go read. I don't see why we need to have the belt, suspenders, and duct tape. Belt and suspenders, I think, would be enough. Thank you.
Further debate, lady from 35.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of my goals this year was to improve, to support election integrity. Our constituents are asking and begging for integrity in our elections, to make sure that they are accurate and honest. I know the good lady from District 8 has worked very hard with others to get this bill right. She's even redone some things in cooperation with others. We talk about how easy it is to vote. It's not always the convenience and the ease of voting. It's protecting the integrity of our votes and of our elections. So I think we need to look at that and take that right to vote so very seriously and protect that. And So I would encourage your green light. Thank you.
Is there further debate? Gentleman from 26.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the good lady from District 8 rise for a question?
Will the lady yield? Lady yield.
Thank you, good lady. What happens to the many senior citizens who live in this state who are good estate planners, and let's say they buy a new home and they put that home in a trust? So it's not in their names, it's in XYZ Trust. And all their utilities go to XYZ Trust. And now, how are they going to be able to go vote?
Lady from 8.
Thank you, gentlemen, and good sir from, I can't see.
26.
26, thank you. You know, one thing that seems to be getting past everybody is once you've already registered to vote, once in this state, you're registered to vote. So it's not like you're going to be registering to vote unless you completely drop off the records for a while, then you have to go back in and register to vote. So when you're talking about seniors who tend to always vote, they're probably not going to have to go back in and re-register to vote. But in regard to a trust is tied to a social security number. So they could still come in with ID and prove who they are if they have never voted in this state. But there's going to be an address tied to that as well. And it's going to be going to the person, whatever his name is, trust or whatever it's called. But they've got to have other ID. I can't believe that they wouldn't have any other ID.
Further debate?
Just to debate the bill, Mr. Speaker.
You have the floor.
Thank you. I think that yet again, this is a voter restriction bill looking for a problem where no solution, or excuse me, it's a solution where no problem truly exists. We are potentially disenfranchising large numbers of senior citizens, as well as anybody who happens to move into this state, who happens to be an astute estate planner. We are disenfranchising students who either live here or who are coming here to go to school. Idaho elections are currently free and fair and very, very safe. But what we are doing here is we are growing government. We are adding to the cost of administering elections, and we are adding to bureaucracy. The Secretary of State will be required to jump through many, many more hoops. My county clerk has emailed me and said that they don't think there's any way that they can get this ready in 8 weeks. And while the good lady did tell us that she believes that this won't be implemented until July, as I read the very last page of the bill, down at the very bottom on page 20, it says an emergency existing, therefore, I'm not quite sure. I really don't see anything that would increase security in this bill, only bureaucracy. There's nothing that I can see that would make our elections really much safer than they were previously. I don't think this is good policy. I think it's completely unnecessary, and I would encourage your red vote.
Is there further debate? Lady from 10.
Thank you, Speaker. So I think anybody in the room would say election integrity is important. And I think as we looked around the country in the 2020, there are certainly those of us who had questions about what happened in other states. I was really pleased when Idaho decided, when the big pillow guy, Michael Lindell, yes, when he said there's a problem in Idaho that in all of them and we ought to look at it, and they did. And I commended them. I thought that's exactly what should happen when there finally is some data that suggests that maybe there was a problem in Idaho. We ought to look at that. And so they did. And guess what they found out? There wasn't a problem. So I say yay to Idaho. And the other thing I would say is that election integrity citizens group, I got to sit in and listen to that all-day thing that happened in January of, it's been a couple years ago actually, and I was really impressed with that group. They just systematically kind of went through what they thought potential problems could be. That's what should happen. People ought to think those things through. So then I took that list and I sent it to this Canyon County clerk I happen to know, and he kind of went through it and he said, you know, almost all of those things are in place, but he appreciated that people wanted to know what was going on, and that he opened the door and said anyone could come in. And I would also suggest, we represent people across Idaho. We ought to take every county clerk up on that offer and go in and see what they're doing so that we can be confident when we are talking to those around us that, you know, in Idaho, we take election integrity seriously, and we have people in place that we have elected there to do exactly that. So, well-meaning, I'm willing to believe that. Necessary, I just don't think so. Thank you. I'll be voting no. You probably figured that out.
Is there further debate? Bill 34.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm supportive of this bill. Most of the discussion against it is revolved around the election day registration. Just remember, that is just